Hari Om. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Team Param Vedanta warmly welcomes you to the second summary session of Panchadashi, the transformational Vedantic text authored by the great warrior saint Swami Vidyaranya. We began these classes in the month of June, picking up selected verses from this chapter. After an intensive workout on those selected verses, we are now on the verge of completion of our study and or in our second session of summary. This has been a systematic journey of Panchadashi through the 7 steps from Ajnana to Tripti. As we have repeatedly discussed, the one shloka from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that has been the central theme of this journey to take us through these 7 stages, that is, Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayamasmiti Purushaha Kimichan Kasya Kamaya Shariram Anusanjivaret. Last week, Dr. Hegde sir and Dr. Anupama ma'am summarized the first 70 verses of the chapter, covering the first pada of the above shloka, that is Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat. In today's class, Dr. Hegde sir will summarize the next bunch of verses from 71 to 190 of the TRIPTI DIPA. These verses will cover the second and third pada of the above shloka, that is Ayam Asmi iti Purushaha and Kimichan. He will be assisted by Dr. Anupama ma'am and Srimati Pannaga. Dr. Hegde sir, please.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Pariyantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmani Savilasa Maha Moha Graha Graseka Karmani. In the last summary, we analyzed half of the first line, Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat. The real focus was, who is this Purusha? Who is this I? Who has to identify with Atma, with this I am Atma? And we had a lot of Purva Pakshi questions trying to help us to answer this question. When we say Aham Brahmasmi, who says Aham Brahmasmi? We also analyze the 7 stages of the individual, beginning from ignorance to avaranam, which is expressed ignorance. I know that I do not know. And then the problem of vikshepa. All these 3 stages which all of us go through, because I do not have a true knowledge of myself, I have a wrong knowledge, and all our suffering is based on vikshepa or projection. Fortunately, when we come to the world of spirituality, the spiritual teacher comes and gives us a sense of reassurance. Brahma asti. There is something called Brahman. And then the journey starts from knowing who this Brahman, that is through words of information. Finally, you get words of introduction by the Guru, and that is called the Aparoksha Jnanam. Once we know our true nature, the rest is a byproduct. All the sorrow is gone. We attain to a state of Tripti. To recap, we understood some terms like what is remote knowledge or Paroksha Jnanam, what is direct knowledge or Aparoksha Jnanam. The scriptural statements which give indirect knowledge of Brahman are called Avantara Vakya. Those scriptural statements which introduce our true nature are called Mahavakya. And accordingly, the Avantara Vakya will remove the Sattva Avarana. That means these statements will tell you Brahma Asti. The Mahavakya will help you to experience that I am Brahman, and that is called removal of the Bana Avarana. Reminder again, all our spiritual exercise is from level 4 to level 5, from Brahma Asti to Brahma Asmi. This was evaluated in the summary of the last class. Now we enter perhaps one of the most difficult and perhaps also the most important part of Vedanta is Mahavakya Vichara. In Mahavakya Vichara, the teacher has to convince us very clearly with the available language skills that we know that although I am so limited, I am indeed, my essential nature is one of Brahman. And how we do that, we will see. After this aspect about Mahavakya Vichara, we go through another phase where from 96 onwards, we have an important part where we internalize that Vijaniyat is very important. And then finally, we enter into the beginning of the next line. So, Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purusha. Now, what is the byproduct? Kim Nichan, about the nature of desire that we will be studying. So today we'll come back to a very important topic called the reflections on Mahavakya. As I already said, we can compare ourselves to the wave. How can you teach the wave to say you are actually similar as the ocean? Somehow the wave must understand. That means it has to give up its name and form and identify with the water. Whenever we come to Mahavakya, we learn certain terms called Jahati, Ajahati. So it involves a lot of language skills. That means when the normal language that we say or the Abhida Vritti does not make sense, we have to use special skills called Lakshana Vritti. We do this all the time, but we don't realize. But to analyze about Shabda Pramanam, I will request Panaga. But before Panaga touches, there is this verse number 75. Swamiji has given a brilliant talk on this one verse, where there are three kinds of words. Samsargartha Bodhaka Vakya, Vishishtartha Bodhaka Vakya, and Akhandartha Bodhaka Vakya. Panaga will help us to enlighten about these big topics. Panaga, please.
Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Now we all know the Mahavakya. And what is that? Tattvam Asi. You are that. And what am I? Aham Brahma Asmi. I am the all-pervading God, omniscient, eternal, the substratum of the entire universe, all that ever was, is, and will be. When our Guru tells us this, we know it just cannot be possible. How can I, the limited individual with name, form, relationships, profession, family, and having to deal with traffic snarls every day, living in Bangalore, be the all-powerful God who we identify as Rama or Krishna, living far above in distant mythical abodes? There is a clear contradiction in the literal meaning. And this literal meaning is called Vachya Artha. Next slide, sir. To arrive at the equality stated in the Mahavakya, we understand that there is an implied meaning in these words. This implied meaning is called Lakshya Artha. When the literal meaning of a sentence does not convey the underlying truth, we apply the process of Lakshana to arrive at the implied meaning. Let us understand what Lakshana is. Suppose a few old friends come home, and after the initial chatter, you serve coffee to all of them. After a few minutes, another friend arrives. So you ask, can I get you also a cup of coffee? So she says, no, thanks. I've already had 2 cups today. In this context, the Vachyartha, or the literal meaning of the word cup, means the container. But has she consumed the cup? No. The implied meaning, the Lakshyartha, is the content, the coffee. So we drop the literal meaning of what she said and take the implied meaning. This dropping of the literal meaning is called Jahati Lakshana, derived from the root ha, meaning to drop. Coming back to the story, This friend now asks for water instead. She doesn't explicitly mention a glass, but it is implied. I add the word glass and get the water. Here, the literal meaning of her request for water is not dropped, but the glass is added for better meaning. This non-dropping of the literal meaning is called ajahati lakshana. Then there is a third type of lakshana which combines both jahati and ajahati, that is, retaining a part of the literal meaning while dropping another part. Let us understand more in the next slide. Suppose another friend joins your party. She is tall and pretty. You can't immediately place her, but a common friend nudges you and asks, do you remember there was this thin, short girl, Lakshmi, in our primary school? You jog your memory and finally remember her. But you find there is no resemblance whatsoever to the lady who has just walked in. So your friend tells you, this lady is only that Lakshmi. Saha ayam Lakshmi. This method of dropping the apparent differentiating physical features of us as children then and now as adults, dropping the time and space attributes while retaining the individual behind these features is called Jahati Ajahati Lakshana or Bhaga Tyaga Lakshana. This is the popular Soyam Devadatta example in Vedanta. Devadatta was probably a popular name in the Vedic period. Soyam Devadatta means that this young Devadatta is the same, it means that this old Devadatta that you're seeing now is the same as the young Devadatta you once knew. Differences in attributes appear very real, but disappear once we understand the truth. The same Vakya and Bhaga Tyaga Lakshana is applied in the wave and ocean example. The wave is a tiny, fleeting, superficial movement of water, while the ocean is a vast, deep, ever-present water body. How can we ever equate them? But when we remove the inferior attributes of the wave and the superior attributes of the ocean, we realize that they are both made up of the very same water. Next slide, sir. Coming to the Mahavakya, the same Bhagatyaga Lakshana is applied to understand it. Tat, meaning that, refers to the all-pervading Nirguna Brahma Chaitanya of Ishvara. Here we drop all of God's superior, infinite, glorious attributes, including his Prapanchatraya. Tvam refers to you, the embodied Nirguna Chaitanya Atma in the Jiva. Here again, we drop all your inferior, limited body-mind attributes, the Shariratraya. The attributes are dropped not only because they cannot be equated, but also because they are mithya. The constant, divisionless, akhanda, unchanging, pure consciousness Satya is retained. Stating it in Tripti DIPA terms, we drop the Upadhi and the Chidabhasa and retain Chaitanya. Thus, the teacher reveals to you that you are not a small jiva, but you pervade the entire universe as Brahman. This is a liberating jnanam. Tat tvam asi. Next slide, sir. In Sanskrit, this type of sentence is called Akhanda Artha Bodhaka Vakya. It means a sentence revealing the essential oneness, akhandata, of seemingly different people or substances. In our Devadatta or Lakshmi example, the person behind the physical differences is Nirvishesha. There are no differences. Hence, the Soyam Devadatta sentence becomes Nirvishesha Devadatta Bodhaka Vakya. The statement with the ocean and wave example will be Nirvishesha Water Bodhaka Vakya, explaining the oneness in the apparent differences. Next slide, sir. There are two other types of sentences in Sanskrit. Samsarga Artha Bodhaka Vakya and Vishishta Artha Bodhaka Vakya. Samsarga Artha Bodhaka Vakya is a sentence which reveals different people or substances who have syntactical relationships. Example, Rama goes to the temple in a car. There is a subject, Rama, there is an object, a car, and there is an object like a temple and an instrument, the car. Another example can be Krishna cuts a mango with a knife. Here, the people, places, and objects are distinct yet connected. These conform to the Dvaita philosophy, which stresses on division between entities. A Vishishta Artha Bodhaka Vakya sentence reveals only one substance but with different features. For example, Veera Sundara Rama Agachati. Brave, handsome Rama is coming. The sentence reveals different features of one and the same Rama. There are no other people or objects or relationships involved. Hence, no prepositions or connections. It reveals one substance with various Visheshana or attributes. These conform to the Vishishta Dvaita philosophy because they say that the whole creation is one Ishvara with several attributes. This cannot be possible because then Ishvara will have all of the Jiva's lower attributes too. Next slide, sir. Therefore, in Akhanda Artha Bodhaka Vakya, we negate the superficial attributes because they cause seeming differences. But we retain the attribute-less substance. Hence, the Mahavakya, Tattvam Asi, does not reveal samsarga. There are no many substances here, or Vishishta, or one substance with many attributes. It reveals only one underlying constant substance without attributes, the Akhanda Nirguna Nirakara Sakshi Chaitanya. Thank you. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Panaga. That was a very clear explanation. We will continue the whole topic of Mahavakya Vichara. This time, Vidyaranya Swami uses different verses from the Vakya Vritti of Adi Shankara. And by using that, let us see, this is our job before us. Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purusha. The limited me Purusha should know that I am Atma. And how does the analysis of the Mahavakya goes on with the help of Vakya Vritti? Dr. Anupama, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Brahma Aparoksha Jnana comes from Mahavakya Vichara alone and not by meditation. Vidyaranya Swami here quotes Adi Shankaracharya's text called Vakya Vritti to drive home this fact that Mahavakya is the only means of Aparoksha Jnana. Quoting verse 45, Mayo Upadi Jagat Yonihi Sarvajna Adi Lakshana. See, while analyzing Tat and Tvam of the Mahavakya, as Pannaga just said, the primary or Vachyartha of the word Tat is Paramatma, that is Brahman with Maya, the Samashti Brahman, described here as Sarvajnatva Adi Lakshana, giving a sense of remoteness or Paroksha Shabala. This is the Tatastha or a remote Lakshana of Brahman. How can this infinite creator Tat be equated with the finite creature Tvam? When this Vachyartha is untenable, we use the Lakshyartha. Tattvam Asi Adi Vakyeshu Lakshana Bhaga Lakshana. Apply Bhaga Tyaga Lakshana or the secondary meaning. See, we know that Jivatma is Shariratraya plus Chaitanya. Paramatma is Prapanchatraya plus Chaitanya. Reject the dissimilar, the Mithya part, and equate the similar parts. This is the meaning of Neti Neti. The first Neti referring to Shariratraya and the second to Prapanchatraya. Therefore, Mahavakya, as Pannaga just said, is Akhanda Artha Bodhaka Vakya. Samsargo va Vishishto va Vakya Artha na atra sammataha Akhanda ekarasatvena vakyartho vidusham mataha. Attributes are negated to establish oneness. What remains is one attributeless substance, one relationship-less substance, akhanda artha bodhaka vakya. In conclusion, that Paramatma, who is essentially Advaya, non-dual Ananda Lakshana, is Pratyag Bodha Eka Lakshana, none other than Jivatma, who is also essentially consciousness. Now, what is the result of understanding Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam? Itham Anyonya Tadatmya Pratipatti Yadha Bhavet Abhramatvam Tvam. With Aikyam Jnana, two misconceptions are abolished. For example, when we know the rope to be a rope and not a snake, the snake vritti just goes away. Here, Jivatma loses Abhramatvam, a very nice word, which means I no longer have spatial, temporal, or attribute-wise finitude. Desha Kala Vastu Parichedana. Second, Prayojana is regarding Paramatma, spatial remoteness or Parokshatvam goes. By negating the Karana status, like Paramatma is the cause of me, my ancestors, and so on, temporal remoteness also goes. The Purva Pakshi continues to ask, what is the consequence of eliminating this misconception? Shankaracharya says, Mahavakya Vichara gives me the aparoksha jnana that I, the Advaita Sakshi Chaitanyam, remain as Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham, and remaining in my original nature is moksha.
Thank you, Dr. Anupama. So this is our analysis that my essential nature is consciousness. The body-mind is only an instrument which helps me to interact with everybody. Your essential nature, because of which you are able to listen, is also consciousness. Now, the nature of Paramatma is also the consciousness. So we need to negate the upadhi. Now, whenever we are studying these topics, a nice method to see whether you have understood clearly is to see, can you answer these Purva Pakshi's questions? So that's the way we are doing the summary. In all these summaries, we are giving a lot of importance to the Purva Pakshi's questions, because after having listened to each speaker, let us see what the Purva Pakshi says. See, the Purva Pakshi says, all that you are now speaking about are verbal statements. Whether it is Avantara Vakya or a Mahavakya, these are only statements. How can a statement give you that direct knowledge? And he goes to continue to argue. Now, in our day-to-day experience, for example, I'm interested to go to the Badrinath temple, and I get a lot of indirect information from various sources. Somewhere through various pramanas that I have access to, I get an indirect knowledge. But one day I travel to Badrinath and see the temple with my own eyes. And when I get that information or that knowledge directly through my sense organs, you will see I have used verbal statements in the first, as the first pramana, and subsequently I have got this direct experience. So too, our Purva Pakshi says, you can get from your teacher some indirect experience of God, but one day you should be able to see God directly like you're seeing Badrinath, Sakshatkara. It should be a direct experience, so I'm not able to accept it. Vidyaranya Swami, that is why he brought the 10th man story, and he uses two words, Dashame Vyabhicharataha. For example, he will tell you in the 10th man story, the 10th man, that means the leader of the group of 10 boys, was looking for the missing 10th man, not knowing he was the 10th man. So the teacher gives two statements. First is the Avantara Vakya, which gives the Paroksha indirect knowledge. He says, Dashamaha Asti. the 10th man exists. So he was reassured that, although I don't experience him, but the teacher is very confidently saying, don't worry, the 10th man is there. Later on, through a certain technique, through a certain prakriya, which involves counting, suddenly he realizes that he has missed one person, and the one he was looking for is none other than himself, and he feels so ashamed. Now, the first was also a verbal statement. The aparoksha, or the direct knowledge, is also a verbal statement. So therefore, our teachers tell us to know Brahman, just the statement from the Upanishads, which are the Mahavakyas, are enough. That is why, although the explanation by Dr. Anupama and Panaga looked a little complex, now we have to make our own analysis, so we are convinced I am that. The Purvapakshi continues. Okay, he says, all right, I will take it. You say Aham Brahmasmi. Whenever you say Aham Brahmasmi, you have to drop the Aham, you have to drop the I. The ego cannot claim I am Brahman. Now, whenever you drop Aham, how is it that you're able to say Aham Brahmasmi? Now, whenever I speak, I have to use an instrument. It is a limiting factor called an upadhi. Now, Dr. Anupama, can you help us to understand these things?
Okay. So here the Purva Pakshi says, you cannot get aparuksha jnanam of Brahman. Verse 83 goes like this. Antakarana sambinna bodha jiva aparukshitam arhati. The Purva Pakshi is saying Brahman or Chit is self-evident because of the antakarana, the mind, which we use as a tool or upadhi. Aparoksha anubhava is there only because of the mind. Mind bhava, sakshi chaitanya bhava. Mind abhava, despite aparoksha jnana, aparoksha anubhava, he says, is abhava. The Purvapakshi says, Brahman is nirupadika, avyavaharika, not available for anything, including jnanam and anubhava. So, he continues to say, you can have only Jiva Aparoksha Jnanam and not Brahma Aparoksha Jnanam. Vidyaranya Swami replies, Na evam brahmatva bodhasya sopadi vishayatvataha. Absence of upadhi or upadhi abhava itself can be a form of upadhi. Take the example of baldness. A person without hair, when described as bald, can be distinguished from others who have hair. Remember, Brahman is Paramarthika, but Brahma Jnana, which we gain, is only in the Vyavaharika Avastha. So what type of upadhi does Brahman have? Any upadhi is just a limitation. Antakarana sahitya rahityabhyam vishishyate. Absence of upadhi is that which helps to distinguish Brahman from other finite things. That's why we use words like prapancha upashama, turiyam, nishprapancha brahman, etc. Because Brahma jnanam is gained in the vyavaharika avastha. This vyavaharika Brahman has upadhis expressed as neti neti. For example, shariratraya abhava is an upadhi, nirguna is an upadhi. In the Paramarthika, however, there is no nirguna, no saguna, no jnana, there is nothing. To describe the Paramarthika in Vyavaharika, we use upadhis. All the while, I know Brahman aparokshataya. I, the mindless consciousness, antakarana rahita, is Brahman. I, the minded consciousness, antakarana sahitya, is Jiva. Until Videha Mukti, I have Prarabdha and I have my Upadhi as body-mind complex. All the while I know Shashvan Nashvarameva Vishwam Akhilam and Prarabdhaya Samarpitam Swavapuhu. In conclusion, Brahman plus mind as Upadhi is Jiva, the Chaitanya, Jivatma, And Brahman, without mind, the Upadhi, is Chaitanya Brahman. So, Aparoksha Brahma Jnana implies exclusion of the mind. The Purva Pakshi does not give up. He says, Aham Artha Pratityagaha Aham Brahma iti dihikuta. Once you exclude the mind, how can the word Aham ever exist? This is in response to Vidyaranya Swami's statement that to know Aham Brahmasmi, I should give up Jiva Bhava. How? By excluding the mind. So Vidyaranya Swami goes back to the fundamentals. He says, the word Aham has three components, the Chit, which is retained, and the Chidabhasa and mind, which are renounced by using Bhaga Tyaga Lakshana. For example, we don't negate the world entirely. We negate the Nama Rupa part and retain the Sat as Brahman. Exclusion of the mind is the understanding that it belongs to a lower order of reality, Mityatva Nischaya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anupama, for giving us a clarification of what is this Brahman, what is this Upadhi, what happens when you say Aham Brahmasmi, whenever the mind is taken away, who says Aham Brahmasmi? All this we have analyzed in all our classes. Now, I want you to touch a little more on what is this Upadhi. Upadhi is a limiting factor, and Brahman has no limitations whatsoever, and therefore Brahman has no Upadhis. Brahman is Nir-Upadhi, Nirguna. Now, how do you detect something that is Nirguna? Example, bald. Now, everything else has some guna. If there is something that does not have any gunas, now that one I need to use and identify as Brahman. Now, it is so surprising in this verse number 85, which says, whenever we are with the mind, we become Jiva. Whenever we renounce the mind, we become Brahman. Now, when do I renounce the mind unconsciously? For example, in sleep, my mind goes off to sleep. When my mind goes off to sleep, at that moment, I am one with Brahman. And therefore, there is no distinction between me and Brahman. And that is why in states of deep sleep, we have the experience of Ananda, we have Purnatvam. The moment we wake up, the mind wakes up. And when the mind comes into being, I suddenly experience all forms of limitations. All Vedantic teaching is nothing has really happened. Now you're using an instrument of the mind. And because of the instrument of the mind, you are experiencing limitations. You are indeed limitless, experiencing limitations because of the Upadhi. If this understanding is there, then you can be awake. And then when the teacher says, Tatitvam Asi, you are able to say, Aham Brahmasmi. Finally, we come to perhaps the most difficult part of this whole discussion about self-realization. The teacher has now convinced us that Aham Brahmasmi. Now we go to a newer topic or another topic, which is called, what is this Vritti Yapti and Phala Vyapti? When I first heard about this, I said, my God, this is a little too difficult to understand. Is it really important? And I also realized, if you want Brahma Jnanam, if you want to be a Brahma Jnani and to be able to be a Jivan Mukta, this part is really not required. But then why do the teachers teach us about all these things? There must be some reason for all that. And therefore, those of us who can apply our mind, who can be a little more patient, who can go into the intricacies of how a teacher tries to use words to describe something which is so difficult to describe. And when you try to paraphrase the words of the teaching, that is why when I said, when you listen to a teacher, you get only 25% information. When you internalize that teaching and try to communicate it with others, then you realize the difficulty, how futile these words are to try to explain what is this vritti, vyapti, and phala vyapti. Why is this important? One reason. There are certain phrases in the Gita which says that only through our mind we will be able to get Brahma Vidya. There are some phases in the Upanishads, like Kena Upanishad, that, through the mind, you will never be able to get to know Brahman knowledge. This Aham Brahmasmi is not possible through the mind. And this comes through the understanding of Vritti, Vyapti, and Phala Vyapti. Another teacher, Swami Tadatmananda, was giving an example. For example, a microbiologist. A microbiologist is a specialist about various microbes, like various bacteria. A medical microbiologist, if you show them under the microscope, they will say this is cholera, this is typhoid. By looking at the, through the microscope, and they will be able to say what kind of bacteria or what kind of microorganism that is. Now, to get this knowledge, you have to use a microscope. Now, does the microbiologist have to study about the microscope? Not really, not at all. The manufacturers of the microscope, they will give you the microscope and they will give you newer and newer advances of the microscope. They will tell you how to use the microscope, but you really do not know the nitty-gritty of the microscope. Now, the nitty-gritty is, for us, when somebody says, okay, I can see a wall in front of me. I can see so many objects in this room. How do I see it? Because of my eyes. The light falls on them, and now they become reduced to certain images. And these images now are converted in the retina into electrical symbols, and the electrical signals go into the brain. The brain is a wonderful computing device, better than any artificial intelligence. This is real intelligence. And there, that object, that is wall in front of me, and now becomes a thought. And the thought is, I see a wall. I also know this much. I know that there is a wall in front of me. I also know I am not this wall. Now, let us analyze. This is okay for Vyavaharic information. But one day, the teacher will give you this knowledge, Aham Brahma Asmi. And this knowledge is different from wall knowledge, because the wall is an object, whereas Brahman is the very subject. Panaga spoke about Akhanda Akara Vritti. There is no gap between the thought of Brahman and me. While I can see the wall, I can see the computer, I can see all of them as not me. But then, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. Dr. Anupama, please tell us.
Okay. How does self-realization take place? As Dr. Hegde just said, quite difficult, but please be patient with me. Quoting verse 90, Swaprakasha api sakshi eva di vritya vyapte anyavat. So, how does any knowledge take place? There are 3 steps. Every knowledge takes place in the mind. Secondly, every knowledge takes place in the mind by operating an appropriate tool, which we call pramana. And thirdly, every knowledge always takes place in the form of a thought called vritti, which is generated in the mind by using a tool, the pramana. Therefore, every jnanam is a vritti jnanam. What is this pramana? There are various types of pramanas. It could be pratyaksha, perception, anumana or inference, upamana, analogy, arthapati, a postulation, anupalabdhi, a cognitive proof, or shabda, words, as we see in our scriptures. There is another fact to know. We know that the mind is pervaded by the reflected consciousness or chidabhasa in all the avasthas. The chidabhasa is an integral part of the mind. So, what is a thought or a vritti? It is just a modification of the mind called antakarana vikara. Therefore, every thought is a part of the mind, and all our thoughts are pervaded by the Chidabhasa. Let us take the corollary. Every vritti jnanam or knowledge has two components. The reflecting medium part, which is the thought of vritti, and the reflected consciousness part, which is the Chidabhasa or called phala here. How is this Brahma Jnanam different from Anatma? Take the example of a pot Jnanam. Pot knowledge is pot thought or vritti plus Chidabhasa. What about Brahma Jnanam? It is just the same. Amshadvayam sarveshu jnaneshu vartate. Brahma Jnana is Atma Akara Vritti, which is the Vritti Amsha, plus the Chidabhasa Amsha. But in the case of Aham Brahmasmi, there is a speciality. Only the thought part or the Vritti aspect is functional, whereas the Chidabhasa part is non-functional. When I get pot knowledge, this is what happens. The mind is extroverted as a beam of thought called the Vritti Amsha, and this exits the Indriya and pervades the pot. This is called Vritti Vyapti. We already know that Vritti and Chidabhasa always go together. So just as the Vritti moves, the Chidabhasa also moves along with the Vritti and pervades the object. This is called Chidabhasa Vyapti or Abhasa Vyapti or Phala Vyapti. Here, Phalam means Chidabhasa. So what are the effects produced by this Vyapti or pervasion of Vritti and Phala? Vritti Vyapti performs the job of removing Ajnana, Avarana Nivritti. Phala Vyapti illumines and does the job of Vishaya Prakashanam. Therefore, we see Avarana Vritti, Nivritti by Vritti Vyapti and Vishaya Spurti by Phala Vyapti. Atma Jnana, as we already said, is slightly different. The Aham Brahma Asmi Vritti eliminates Atma Ajnana. That means Vritti Vyapti is functional. But why should the reflected consciousness illumine the original consciousness? Is moonlight needed to illumine the sun? No. This means that Phala Vyapti, although present, is non-functional. The difference between Atma and Anatma Jnana is, to know Anatma, we need both Vritti and Phala Vyapti, whereas to know Atma, we need only the Vritti Vyapti. So here is a small table of difference between Atma and Anatma Jnana. Both need Vritti Vyapti, the thought. Atma Jnanam is Akhanda Akara Vritti. There is just one undivided aspect, the Atma. Anatma Jnanam is Sakanda Akara Vritti. That means various objects can get involved. Atma Jnanam is Brahma Avaraka Ajnana Vritti. It removes Brahma Ajnana. Anatma Jnanam is Vishaya Avaraka Ajnana Vritti. Finally, Atma Jnanam does not require Phala Vyapti, whereas Anatma Jnanam requires Phala Vyapti. Thank you.
This is true, but let us see how we can understand it. Whenever there is a difficulty, I go to Bhagavan Ramana and how Ramana analyzes, and Ramana has a very nice method of understanding that any object that I see in my mind in this world, it will be illustrated in this picture. Now I'm seeing a wall in front of me, and that wall comes into my mind in the form of a thought. That thought in my mind, because my mind is a computer, whatever I see is processed and I can see the wall. That thought that there is a wall in front of me is called a Vritti Vyapti. Now, who is seeing that thought? See, the computer is inert. it requires an enlivening principle. The enlivening principle is Atma or consciousness. When the Atma or consciousness interacts with the mind, a new entity is born, which is called the Chidabhasa. And Bhagavan Ramana calls this Aham Vritti. Now I can see a wall, I can see a lamp, I can see so many clothes around, I can see a computer. So there are so many objects that I can see. But then I can also see, I can see the wall, I can see the clothes, I can see the computer, and all of them are supported by one thought called Aham Vritti. Aham Vritti, that I thought in this text, is called Chidabhasa. That means for any experience to happen, my computing device has a vritti vyapti. The thought of all these objects are the vritti vyapti. And this vritti vyapti combined with the phala vyapti of the Chidabhasa, I get to know two things. There is so many objects in front of me. I am seeing all of them. I am not any of them. I am apart from them. The new experience comes when the teacher says that consciousness because of which you are alive is none other than you. Now that also comes as a thought. That also is illumined by this Aham Vritti. But this Aham Vritti now knows what we are talking about is none other than the consciousness which has made, which is like the sun of consciousness which has illumined the moon. Now, how or is there any need for the moon to illumine the sun? Now, in this knowledge, that means in the knowledge of Aham Brahmasmi, that I am Brahman, which has come through my teacher and through my Shastras, which has somehow entered into my mind, and that is also called a Vritti Vyapti. There is a Phala Vyapti. But the Phala Vyapti does not serve any function because the Aham is overpowering it. And the Aham is Akhanda Akara. It is not different from me. If you have got it, you have got it. And this is a great jump. Now the Purva Pakshi is also listening. And Purva Pakshi is somehow convinced that, okay, Astu Bodha, okay. All right, agreed. I agree about all this that you have said about Mahavakya. But Purva Pakshi is still very persistent. And he says, now you know you are Brahman. But he says, one thing is very certain. This knowledge that you have, that you are Brahman, is a very, very adhrida knowledge. It is not a firm knowledge. It is like you have laid down some concrete flooring, but then you don't want any animals or human beings to walk on it, so you cordon it off. It is very fluid. I have got Brahma Jnanam, but this Brahma Jnanam is adhrida. It is very, so that is why we now go into the next step. It is like this, and we are all in this phase where I have got Brahma Jnanam. I know I am Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi is very clear. But the fact that I am a samsari has not gone off. I still see limitations. I still experience limitation. I still have so much of agony and anxiousness in my mind. What to do? So the teacher says, all right, you got Jnanam. Now we need to work on what is called Vijaniyat, we. And for that, we from 97 to 134. This is the number of verses that he's working on from 97 to 134 to remove these obstacles. And these obstacles he classifies. So, we should know these obstacles. I have Brahma Jnanam. But then Jnanam is there, Jnana Nishta is not there. So Vidyaranya now tells you where are these obstacles and what are the solutions. The first obstacle is called Pramana Asambhavana. That means the same Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras have been interpreted differently by the great Madhvacharya, the great Ramanujacharya differently, and by Adi Shankara. Therefore, we have two schools or three schools of Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, and Advaita, and the interpretations are totally different. The source book is the same, so a student may have a doubt. But then Through Shravanam, and I have Shraddha, my teacher, I will be able to accept that and I will manage that. Then there is something called Prameya Asambhavana. The problem is not with the scriptures, it is not with the Pramana. The problem is with my intellect. Now the teacher says Jagan Mithya, and you say, how can this world, which is so tangible and real, and all my problems come because the world is so real, how can you so casually say the world is not real and my problems are not real? It does not appeal to me logically. So the teacher has to spend a long time with you, and this is the process of called Mananam. Hopefully, through Shravanam and Mananam, these two obstacles are dealt with, and then we come to the final and the most important topic called Viparita Bhavana, and that is what is called the habitual notions of vasanas. I have lived for a long time. For example, Karna has been humiliated and made to feel very inferior because of his so-called low birth, despite all his abilities. But one day, when Kunti calls him and tells him who he is, and not only tells him, like this Mahavakya Vichara, she gives the whole story to convince him. And now he's got convincing knowledge that he's not a Suta Putra that he was born to believe, but he is none other than the son of the Lord's son. That means he's got a divine birth. He is extraordinary. Although he is extraordinary, although he has got this knowledge, he goes away from his mother, goes back to the battlefield. Now, in the heat of the battle, he comes back to the original Karna. That means we need to be able to internalize this knowledge, handle all these obstacles, and go through a very painstaking process, what is called Nididhyasana. Nididhyasana is of two types, Samadhi Abhyasa Nididhyasana, where we sit in a quiet place and meditate on Nityoham, Shuddhoham, Buddhoham, Muktoham, Shivoham, Shivoham, Shiva Swarupa. Or there is another beautiful type which Vidyaranya Swami brings in from Yoga Vashishta, and that is called Brahma Abhyasa Nididhyasana. What is that? I will tell you in a moment. What is our whole job? Our whole job is to get Aparoksha Jnanam. Aparoksha Jnanam I already have. Jnanam is there, but this Jnanam has to take roots. It has to percolate into every cell of my being, and that is called Jnana Nishta. Aham Brahmasmi has to be strengthened. Jagan Mithya has to become very, very clear to me. That means I am the only source of permanent peace, security, and happiness. Whatever happens to the world around me, including my body and mind, shall not affect me. And that is done through meditating on this nice word, which says, this is a kind of a sadhana. This is a tat chintanam, tat katanam, anyon tat prabodhanam, etad eka paratvam cha brahma bhyasviduhu buddhaha. What do the wise people say? The wise people say tat chintanam. All the time in your waking world, whenever you're not doing anything else, imagine and live your life. Like we say, fake it before you make it. Act like a realized being. From now on, you are Aham Brahmasmi, and see how you go along this world, how a Brahman is looking and interacting through your body. Whenever you have an opportunity to share it with Anyon Tat Prabodhanam to others, other than this, try not as far as possible to entertain any other thoughts. So ultimately what we are trying to do, that I am Satyam, and then this knowledge, it is said, there is another nice verse, which verse 104, where Vidyaranya Swami says, those amongst us who have been upasakas, who have done various forms of upasanas, the Nididhyasana portion can become shorter. Swamiji says many of us in Kali Yuga bypass Karma Yoga and Upasana Yoga and straight away come to Jnana Yoga. He says, no problem. All that you have to do, your period of Nididhyasanam becomes a little longer. And he says, those who are Kritopasanas, those who have done a lot of Upasanas, for them, Shravanam itself can become Nididhyasanam. During this series of almost 40 verses, Vidyaranya Swami says, those who are involved in intense worldly activity, that will take you away from the spiritual truth. And therefore, our teacher says, as far as possible, depending upon your state in life, reduce possessions, reduce obligations, reduce relations, and reduce transactions, because all of them take you away from Brahma Vidya, because the knowledge has not yet become internalized. The knowledge is not yet Drida. The Purva Pakshi comes. Now, how is it that possible that people like Janaka, they are all students of Brahma Vidya, but he continued to be a Grahastha, he continued to be a king. But then these are all exceptions in the spiritual faith. They are very evolved beings, and therefore let us not compare ourselves with all of them. And then finally, there is a very beautiful verse number 134. And this verse which says about Marge Gantro Dvaye Shranto. Now, all of us are spiritual travelers. We are going on a yatra. It is a very difficult yatra, like the parikrama around Mount Kailash. But there are two distinct types of people. One among these two people has got Brahma Vidya, and he knows I am not this body-mind complex, I am Atma. About that he is convinced. Although my body is tormented by the yatra, the hardships of the yatra, this person knows my journey is over. I'm here only for a time pass. And that itself keeps the person in tremendous amount of zeal, and he is able to finish the parikrama. The other person finds that, because he's so overwhelmed, he just gives up. And so this is the advantage. And with verse 134, we have completed Brahma Vidya. The first line, Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purushaha. Now what are the two important messages that I have at the end of the first line? I will take both of them from Bhaja Govinda. Until Jnanam becomes Jnana Nishta, remember this. Satsangatve Nisangatvam. Nisangatve Nirmohatvam. Nirmohatve Nischala Tattvam. Nischala Tattve Jivan Muktihi. Once Jnanam has come into your mind, then it does not matter what you do. Yogaratova, Bogaratova. Sangaratova, Sanga Vihinaha. Yasya Brahmani Ramati Chittam. Nandati, Nandati, Anandati Eva. I had planned to do the Kim Ichan part, which is, I think we will do it on a subsequent, we will do it in the next class. I will request, because we have already finished, and this part has been extremely difficult on our minds. If you have the ability to, in this very crisply, we have been able to summarize the first line. And I would like you to, if possible, go through this learning once again. This is going to be premiered. This will be online, and therefore we will do our own studies so that this is internalized. Venkatesh Prasad, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hegde sir, Dr. Anupama madam, and Srimati Panaga for a wonderful class covering the topics of reflection on Mahakavya, self-realization, abundance in knowledge, Prarabdha, the wise man. We extend our deep gratitude to all our viewers for staying with us all through this summary class too. In our next summary session, let us listen to our Hegde sir revisiting the final set of verses from 191 to 297 to conclude our study of TRIPTI DIPA. That brings us to the end of today's class. We will close it with our Shanti mantra. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरिः ओम्।